in case some people don't show up. Okay. So today we're going to be going over test taking strategy. So, what to do on the day of the test, what to do the night before, what to do the week before, stuff like that, right? Okay. So on the test, they're going to test three skills. So one is the ability to recall information, for example, terminology and hard facts, stuff like, very specific things that you have to have memorized. Two, ability to apply your biological knowledge to unfamiliar situations. For example, when you compare graphical data or when you interpret specific scenarios. And three, the ability to synthesize biological information, like making these deductions from qualitative and quantitative data accumulated from experiment. This is similar to a lab. This is what you're going to be doing most of the time. So as you can see, the ability to recall information, so just like hard facts and memorization, pure memorization is very little, pretty small part of the test. It's only 30%. Most of it's going to be interpretation and synthesizing knowledge. Okay, so I'm sure you guys already all know the format. It's going to be 80 multiple choice questions in 1 hour, so 60 minutes, and then there's going to be 60 common questions or central questions, and then 20 either E or M questions, right? So E or M, you will decide on the day of the test, and it will be discussed later on. Although honestly, you should already have a good plan in mind as to what you should do. So as you can see, if you look at the percentages, this is pretty common. This is not exact for every single test, of course, but it's pretty common to have these percentages. Where for both of them, the organismal biology or the plant biology is going to be the same, but the for M, there's going to be more cellular and molecular biology, of course, and more evolution and diversity, and more genetics. And for E, there's going to be more ecology, of course, and more evolution and diversity. Okay, so these are the appropriate score ranges. By the way, I forgot to tell you guys, the class today is going to be pretty short. There's not going to be much context to go over. There's only going to be 10 slides or so. So because this is just general testing strategy, we're not really learning anything new, right? So the mean score for ecology is going to be 622. And the mean score for molecular is going to be 654. So comparatively, when you compare the two, these, especially E, are on the lower spectrum of mean subject test scores. So between all of the subject test scores, these are kind of on the lower side. I would say the median is about 650 to 700, but on the lower side, especially the lowest, are about 610 to 620. So of course, that means that these tests are going to be slightly harder than normal subject tests would be. Not that I expect you guys to already have taken subject tests, of course not. But if you have taken subject tests or if you've taken practice subject tests, just know that these are going to be just a little bit harder. So a good score, what's considered a good score, at least by the College Board, would be in the upper 25th percentile. So you're in the top 25% of all test takers. So that would be about 700 to 710 or above for biological E, and about 740 or above for bio-M. So we're talking 700 for bio-E and about 740 for bio-M. A great score, which is an excellent score, would be in the upper 10 to 15th percentile. It depends on what your definition of a good score, a great score is. If you have slightly lower expectations, that would be 50th percentile. If you have higher expectations, that would be 10th percentile. So that would be about 730 to 740 or above for bio-E and about 760 to 770 or above for bio-M. And then an Ivy level score. So these scores are what you would expect most Ivy League applicants to be submitting, because I know this is all for college, right? That would be in the top 5 percentile. So of course, everything with the Ivy League level is going to be in either the top 5th percentile or the top 1 percentile. But in this case, there's no top 1 percentile, so we're just going to do the top 5th percentile, which also makes sense, right? So for a 780 plus, that would be a 780 plus for biological E and a 800 for bio-M. So the top 5th percentile so top 5% of all people who take this test for bio-M would get a perfect score. So that's perfect score. And a 780 plus would be a top 5 percentile for bio-E. So obviously this doesn't mean that you need to get an 800 to even consider applying to an Ivy League school. Of course, there are in fact very few Ivy League schools that actually require taking any subject test whatsoever. Plus, you could also have other subject tests like math too, or chemistry or physics, or any of the humanities that could definitely boost your profile up. For example, if you have like a 760, maybe that wasn't the score that you wanted, and you think, okay, I can't apply to an Ivy League. but you have 800s on other tests, or you have 780s or 790s on other tests, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Right? And of course, this doesn't mean that you have to get an 800, of course. Very few people do get an 800. And honestly, if I'm going to be honest with you, applying, even though I did say that the top 5 percentile for Bio-M is 800, anything above 750 would probably land you in a pretty high position. Like I said before, that would be a great score for both E and M, above a 750. So in the high 700s would be an excellent score, and that would be able to, you'd probably be able to apply to most colleges in that case. All right, okay, so scoring. So I'm pretty sure all of you guys already know the scoring. For every question you get wrong, the curve is decreased, raw curve, your raw score is decreased by 1.25. For every question you don't do, the curve is decreased by 1. Fractional raw curves are rounded. So for example, 0.25 is rounded down, 0.5 is rounded up, and 0.75 is also rounded up. So usually you can get about 2 to 3 or even 4 wrong and still get an 800. That's the curve. Of course, every test is going to have a different raw curve. All the tests that I give you as well are going to have different raw curves. So usually you can get about 2 to 3 wrong. Yeah, like I said, and sometimes even 4 wrong, get 800. So it's not all about knowing specific things about biology. It's mostly just about perseverance and learning from your mistakes, right? So while it's not as draining as the actual SAT test, which is out of 1600, it's going to be several hours long. You have to make sure that you stay concentrated, hydrated and full during the entirety of the test. You don't want to be dehydrated or hungry during the test. That'll definitely take off your concentration. So make sure you're calm before the test. But I'm going to give a little anecdote. You don't need to be calm while you're taking the test. So people always say stay calm and stay concentrated. So there's a difference between being concentrated and being calm. If you're too calm during a test, that's good. That's too bad, actually. You'd probably be too slow, and then you wouldn't be able to get everything done on time. The main thing is to stay concentrated. If you don't stay concentrated, then everything's gonna be bad. So you can stay calm if you are calm and concentrated. That's perfectly fine. You'll do very well, actually. But I feel like if you're concentrated, but you're still panicking, you're still gonna do just fine, right? Because as long as you stay concentrated, as long as you do the best of your ability, and as long as you finish all the questions, if you can, within your time limit, that's totally fine, right? So especially during the end of the test, if you see that you're missing some questions, you should definitely not be calm. If you are maybe 10 minutes if there's maybe 10 minutes left in the test and you still haven't done like the last 20 questions, you should definitely not be calm. You should definitely be starting to panic, but you should still stay concentrated, right? Okay, that's really weird, but I'm gonna keep on going. So here's the question types. There are 2 different types of questions. At the very beginning of the test, you're gonna have a few questions where they're gonna give you, for example, an A, B, C, D, or E. And then between those A, B, C, D, or E, you have to choose an answer from 1 or 2. I believe they don't repeat, but I could be wrong. They could have changed it, but I don't think they repeat. And you just have to choose one of the answers, right? So it could be A, B, C, or D, or E. So on the second question is the standard question where they just give you a question and there's multiple choice answers. And that's the one that we've been doing, I've been giving you guys. Okay, so so people, I get a lot of people asking me whenever I tutor whether they should take E or M. So E stands for ecology and M stands for molecular, of course, but I'm just gonna call them E or M in this case. So they're both the same length, right? Let's just get that clear. They're both the same length and they should take about the same amount of time. So E is obviously more about ecology and evolution plus diversity, and M is more about cellular and molecular biology plus genetics. So E, it's harder, relatively harder to get a high score, and in M, it's relatively easier to get a high score. So what do I mean by this? So if you look at the score behind, if you look at these scores, right? When you notice the percentiles and the means and everything, you can see that the Bio E is always consistently lower than the Bio M. So that means that people in general are getting lower scores on the E test. That means it's comparatively, I'm just saying this may not apply to you, but in general, for the general populace, E is considered to be a harder test or have a harder curve. But I'm actually going to go over that. So in fact, E does have a better curve. So E does have a better curve when you can get more questions wrong and still get the same amount of answers. This is most likely because E is just a harder test in general. But of course, you can see a lot of people will disagree online, saying that E is a better test to take because it has a better curve. But you know, some people do say that, you know, you do focus on E a lot more. But with our school, just know that our school focuses a lot less on E and encourages M a lot more. Because you know, our bio teachers might say, for example, I know my bio teacher, I think she's still retired, you know, Miss Cone. She stressed that if you were still deciding whether to take E or M, you should take M. Just default to M. And I think most people in our school do default to M because it's more common. You know, we have about 40,000 test takers every year, and where E has, you know, about 30,000 test takers every year. But I think people just have this knowledge, this general consensus, or this, you know, this belief that E is harder than M, and that is generally the case. Generally, now I'm going to repeat myself. This is generally the case where for the most of the populace, this is going to be the case, right? But our school is an elite school, Sarasa High School, of course, which is what I'm talking about. School is a relatively elite school where at the levels that we're teaching biology, the levels that we're focusing on biology, we really shouldn't be we should really be disregarding this apparent, you know, rift, this apparent divergence between E or M. In that case, if you do excel at both E or M, like I'm going to go to the next slide. If you do excel at both E or M, you should probably take that one. If there's a significant difference, I'm talking something like, you know, 40 points or 50 points or anything above that, 30 to 40 points, 40 to 50 points or anything above that, difference between E or M on the same exact test, right? Don't take two different tests, take the same test. Then you should really be considering choosing one or the other. But if not, I would default to M, right? Because that's the one our school focuses a little bit more on. So, okay, this is more general strategy. This is going to be some of the last slides. This class is probably only going to be about 30 minutes long, not even 30 minutes, like 20 minutes long or so. So general strategy would be to pace yourself. Remember, you have an hour to take the test. You don't need all of it. You probably don't need all of it. There are some people who don't finish on time, but I have never tutored someone that has not finished on time, I don't believe. And if you don't normally drink coffee or energy drinks, do not do it on the morning test. Coffee is a diuretic. We already went over that. Coffee will make you pee. Energy drinks will make you spike. And also, that being said, do not sleep. Do sleep a lot the night before. Do not waste your entire night studying. I know some people, they panic. They start stressing out. Okay, they're like, okay, we didn't study enough. I'm still, 20 points below my target score. That's totally fine. Remember, your test taking before. If you take a few practice tests below the amount that I give you, or about or below the amount that I give you, and you're still getting about 20 to 30 points below your target test, that should be a little bit of a wake-up call, right? So if you have a target score of about, let's say 750, and you're still getting consistent 720s or 730s on the tests, on all your practice tests before you took the test, maybe like a week before you took the test, right? Do not panic. A light should go off, but do not panic, right? Just know to yourself, think about yourself. Do you usually perform better or worse in high levels of stress? Some people produce better because they're more concentrated. They know more is at stake. They're more focused on the test when there's a lot of people around them, when there's a high stress environment. Some people just do general better in high stress environments. For example, I do a lot better in high stress environments than I do in low stress environments. And some people don't. I think actually most people don't. Most people don't do well in high stress environments. So if you're one of those people and you're still not getting the score that you wanted, you're still not getting as high of the score that you wanted, for consistently for just a week or so before the test, then you should probably kick up your studying a little bit. But do not waste your entire night studying. Do not pull all-nighters the day, and especially do not pull an all-nighter the day before, because you need that for concentration. On the day of the test, you need your photo ID, your admissions ticket, a ton of pencils, and at least 2 to 3 erasers. Now, on the College Board, it says to bring 1 eraser and like 5 or 6 pencils. Not 5 or 6, 2 to 3 pencils. Bring way more than that. You're going to need 5 to 6 pencils. I found that this most students generally do this anyway. They don't need to be told to do this. They're going to bring a lot of pencils because most people, they're afraid, right? They're worried about this test, but they're worried about breaking pencils and stuff. But just know that if you bring a ton of pencils, first of all, it's a reassurance that you will have enough pencils. And, in case one does break or something along those lines, you always have another pencil, of course, right? And at least 2 to 3 erasers. For example, if you don't like the speed that one is erasing at, you can change it to another one. If you don't like how dark or how smudging one of the erasers are, choose another one. So always, bring extra. Don't bring less than you need. Do not, I don't think I have this on here, but going back to the energy drinks or anything like that, I believe I have it. I don't have it. Okay. So do not eat a lot of sugar. The morning of, do not eat a lot of sugar. Try to eat as little sugar as you can actually. But if you do have, like a glass of orange juice on the morning of, don't change that up, right? To get your general glass of orange juice, because if you do thrive on a little bit of sugar before a high concentration event, then of course you should do that. But don't drink energy drinks or high amounts of sugar right before the test, because of course you will crash. You will have a sugar crash. You think people think that if they drink a ton of sugar, just a crap ton of sugar, they will be focused the entire time through and they'll be on the sugar rush. That does exist. There is a sugar rush, but the crash comes a lot earlier than you think. People think that, okay, if I eat this much sugar, I'm gonna have enough sugar for at least an hour before I crash. That's not true. You will crash a lot earlier than an hour. In fact, you'll actually feel worse. In general, you might do better on the first section of the test, but remember, the first section of the test, like the first half of the test, is generally the easier part. I don't know if this still occurs, but it does usually go in difficulty order, I believe, right? It gets harder as the test goes on and then resets once you go to the last 20 questions. But yeah, so don't eat sugar the day before. Don't eat a ton of sugar right before the test. Okay, so for practice, I'm saying this is like a month or two before. It depends on how long you want to study for. Some people study for a month. I think I studied for 3 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks before the test, but not including the actual test the class I had. But this should probably be about a month or two before, right? So for practice, you should first decide whether you want to take ERM. So to do this, you're going to take one central biology test, so the 60 common questions. So you should time yourself on that and grade yourself, of course. One ecology test, time yourself and grade yourself separately from the central biology test, right? So you should have a time for all three and one molecular test. This is if you don't know what you're taking. If you have a solid idea of what you want to do, like you know that you're much better at M, like, consistently you do better in school, of course, on the M tests than on the ecology test, or you just don't understand a fundamental concept from either of the ones, then definitely go forward with that, right? If you know, but if you don't know, if you're still just a little bit worried, then definitely take the different ones. So I had a friend who was pretty positive that he was going to take the E test, but then I think like a week or so before the test, he decided to just take the M test on a whim, just a random whim after I recommended him do it, and then he found that he actually did significantly better on the M test than on the E test, and then he decided to switch from the M test to the E test. I've also had another friend who did the same exact thing. It was more than a week though. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks, so he had a little bit more time to prepare. But this time it was the opposite, where he had an E test. So he was very positive that he was going to take M, as you do, as our school recommends. But then he took an E test and he found out that it was a lot easier for him. As in he was a lot more familiar with the concepts of E, even though he didn't know it at first. Sometimes unconsciously you might be better at E or you might be better at M. Personally, I kept on getting, I'm an exception, of course. I kept on getting 800 on both. So it really didn't matter which one I took. So I ended up just taking M the day before. So that brings me to the second part, where this applies more to people like me. So if you compare the two, which one do you feel you should, when you compare the two tests that you take, obviously I'm not talking about the common test, I'm talking about the E test and the M test. When you compare the two, which one do you feel more familiar with? Which one do you think the concepts are more familiar with you? And which one took you less time, and which you did better on? Those three factors are the ones that should decide which one you take. So this is very personal advice, but if you remember, depending on the time score, if you feel familiar, if the familiarity is about the same, then it should all narrow down to the time and the score. But if you are considering, for example, if you take the E test and it took you less time but you did worse on it, and if you took the M test, it took you more time but you did better on it, then try and lean towards score. We're trying to go for a score here. Granted that you do finish after time. You should always leave yourself 5 minutes to double check everything. At least 5 minutes. I think I had 10 or 15, I can't remember. But if you are leaning, or if you are depending between time or score, if it's like a scale thing where you have to outweigh, one outweighs the other, then of course try to lean towards score, because we're always stressing score over time. Because of course, you can take the SAT multiple times, and your time can improve. You can always improve your time, but it's extremely hard to improve your score. Okay, there's a question. Okay, so should I know characters as well? Okay, so I'm gonna go over that actually. So I'm gonna put this on the side for now, but I'm gonna answer that question. So actually I'm gonna answer it now. So regarding those things, characteristics of each phyla and organ systems, actually, what a coincidence. I was actually going to talk about that right at the end. So the last point here is don't spend too much time studying the more complicated stuff. For example, the pathway of the blood through the heart, the specific endocrine systems and the hormones and what they do, like specific characteristics of each phyla, like organ systems and development and stuff. That doesn't mean you should know these in and out. You should have a general idea. For example, you should know which way the heart bleeds, which side is which. But these are very hyper specific, and they take up a lot of brain space. So when you're studying for the SAT, you have a limited amount of space in your brain. Everything else is decided on games, watching videos, whatever, right? And it's focusing on other stuff like math, literature. So you have a specific amount of space in your brain. Of course, this isn't scientifically accurate, but this is just my personal belief. There's a specific portion of your brain that's dedicated to biology only, right? Some people happen to have a larger portion dedicated to biology through training, through or naturally. Some people just naturally have a larger ability to memorize bio and understand bio. Okay, but this brain space, it can be filled very easily. So hyper-specific things like specific endocrines, like you don't need to know. Like for example, this specific hormone does this very specific thing. It affects these very specific organs. Just know that, okay, for example, the pituitary gland, you should know which type of hormones. You should know the names at least, right? Because that might be one of the memorization questions I was talking about earlier. But also going back to that, the memorization questions with the hyper-specific ones, they're mostly the memorization questions. They're mostly not going to be super specific. They're going to be pretty general. There's only going to be a few hyper-specific questions. I'm going to say maybe 5 to 10% of them are hyper-specific. And remember, only 30% of the test is going to be pure memorization. So if you take 10% of those, 30%, that's 3% of the entire test. 3% of the entire test. I'm not talking about the entire test. I'm talking about general. So if you look at the common or the central biology part, that's 60 questions. So 3% of 60 questions, it's really not a lot. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that a lot. So maybe it's like 2 questions, 1 or 2 questions at most. And those, of course, those are the questions that separate the 800s from the 790s. But I already gave over those questions, the higher level thinking questions. Those are the ones that I'm talking about. Very hyper-specific memorization questions. But like I said, don't spend too much time on them. They take up a lot of brain space. I think the problem with most of the people that I tutor is that they always ask me, oh, should I know these specific things? Should I know this specific things? Is this thing going to be on the test? Is this thing going to be on the test? Are they definitely going to ask this? See, the problem is I don't know. I don't know what's going to be on the test specifically. I can give you a general idea of what's going to be on the test. But I can't tell you like, oh, are they going to ask what kind of respiratory system, arthropods have or whatever. I don't know specifically. But just in general, you should know that these very hyper-specific questions that I'm asking, not the arthropod one, that one you should definitely know, but these very hyper-specific questions that I usually ask at the end of my homeworks, at the end of these specific tests. These are the ones that don't appear very often, and these are the ones that don't usually count for a lot of scores. Because remember, you have around 3 to 4 questions that you can get wrong. These 3 to 4 questions, I doubt there's going to be no hyper-specific questions in there. There's definitely going to be 1 or 2 very hyper-specific memorization questions in there. All right? Okay. So did I answer your question? That should be right. Okay. So if I did answer your question, I'm going to go forward with the rest of the slide. So this is for continued practice. Remember, this is still a couple months before the test. So if you're still unsure about it, or if you're still about equal in both sections, then just look over both sets of questions on the test day. So you should waste less than a minute on this. Just look over both sets of questions just very generally and decide then and there during the test day which one you want to take. So this is what I did. I just looked over the general questions. I assumed to myself, okay, M is relatively easier. That's just a little bit easier, just slightly on the left side. So I'm not gonna take any chances. So I decided to go for M instead. So people have asked me, okay, so people who are unsure about it and they have decided to decide on the test date because they're relatively equal in time, everything, all those 3 factors that I was talking about before, they're equal in all 3 of them. There's no difference. There's no discernible difference, at least, with all the tests that they've taken. And they decide to take it on, decided to choose on test day and waste less than a minute choosing, of course. Always take less than a minute choosing it. Then they always ask me, okay, on my resume, so when I'm applying to colleges or when I'm bragging to my friends or whatever, which one is more impressive, to get an 800 on E or an 800 M? So I'm going to tell you, population-wise, and when you look at the statistics in general, getting an 800 in E is definitely more impressive. But college-wise, they don't care. They don't care at all. They don't look at what kind of test you take. They don't care whether you take E or M. They just look at the fact that you took biology and you got an 800 and they move on. So in terms of that, just choose whatever. Right? It doesn't matter if you think, okay, I might get less clout because I took the M test and I got an 800, but I didn't take the E test and get an 800. Don't worry about that, right? That's totally irrelevant. So in general, you should take around 3 to 4 practice tests with the intent of a perfect score. So people always say they have a target score. There's a difference between a target score and a intent score. So an intent score is the score that everyone should be aiming for, and that's a perfect score. A target score is the score that you know that you're going to take around the test. So for example, every single test you take, you're slowly improving, right? Because that's what you should do. The next slide that says that the very least that you should try for is improvement over time. But maybe like a week or two before the test that you're taking, you're getting about the range is about 730 to 740. Let's say let's take into another account that you know that you perform better on stressful days, or actually let's do the opposite. So you know that you're doing worse. Let's say that you know that you do worse in a high stress concentration environment. So in that case, your target score should be about 710 to 730. That's the score that you should expect when you get your score back on the test. Of course, when you overpass that, perfect. That's the most ideal pass. But when you don't, that's not what you do. That you should deal with that by yourself. You should consider whether or not you want to retake it, or you want to just leave it out and don't show anyone or don't tell any colleges about that. Because of course, remember, most colleges don't require the SAT bio subject tests. In general, though, you should take about 3 to 4 practice tests. But there's a difference between target score, with the score that you're going to get and your expectations are going to be hovering around, and perfect score. By the way, with the target score, there should be a range. There's no specific target score. That's definitely not applicable. There's very little chance of getting, for example, you're not going to get a 740. You're going to get a range of 730 to 750 exactly, right? So your expectation target score should be a range, and that range should be about 20 to 30 points. So you should say, instead of saying, I want to get exactly 740, you say, I want around 730 to 750 or 720 to 750, depending on how you want your expectations to go. Of course, it shouldn't be anything higher than 100. You shouldn't be expecting anything from the 700 to 800 range. That's way too broad and way too general. And that's almost too generous to give yourself, right? Okay, so that being said, the target score being said, those are your expectations. There's a difference between expectation and goals. So every single time you take a practice test, and especially when you take the actual test itself, you should intend to get a perfect score. So what do I mean by this? Every time you take a practice test, you want to get a 800 score. So you're taking the test as if you're getting an 800 score. You're expecting a different score altogether, unless of course your target score is 780 to 800. But you should always intend to get a perfect score. Right, that almost seems self-explanatory, but some people don't know this, right? So people saying, okay, I did this many questions, I can leave these questions out, and that kind of keeps me in my range. You should never do that. Always answer all the questions. If you have time, always answer all the questions in everything. I should have added this onto the slide, but that's a very important piece of advice. Always answer every question. And if you don't know the question, take an educated guess, right? If you're running out of time. So that's what I mean by the intent of a perfect score. So like I said before, you should at least strive for improvement over time, unless you're already in the 750 to 800 range. If you're taking practice tests, if the first 2 or 3 practice tests you take are already in the 750 to 800 range, you really shouldn't be expecting to improve over time. But sometimes you have a 750 and you want to get an 800, then you should be expecting to improve maybe 10 or 20 points at the time, because once you get higher, it's harder to improve. That makes sense, right? So if you're not getting in the 750 to 800 range when you begin practice tests, you should be increasing about 40 to 50 points for every single test. So, the interval between the rest can be as short as 4 days or as long as 3 weeks. So the interval between every single test should be about the same. You can't take the test, you can't take one test and then wait a week and improve 40 to 50 points, and then take the test right after, like the day after that second test, and expect to also improve 40 to 50 points. That's unreasonable. You should always be increasing by the same amount of interval. That interval can be totally up to you. It could be as short as 4 days if you're studying a lot, or if you're just studying insanely. If you have if you have tons of free time, for example, during the summer, that can be as short as 2 days. But it can also be as long as 3 weeks. So this also generally applies to the regular SAT, where you can kind of study for 3 days, or you can study your butt off for 2 days or 3 days, and then take the test right after, and you just keep on taking tests 3 days and 3 days and 2 days. So this can be as short as 3 days or as long as 3 weeks. You can even take up to a month of studying if you really want to. But of course, if you're studying for a month, and you're doing at a general decent pace, and you're not procrastinating whatsoever, then you should be increasing, I think, more than 40 to 50 points. I would probably say about 70 to 80 points at that point. If you're not in the 750 to 800 range. And then, like I said, 3 to 4 practice tests. However, if you do, just know that the fewer practice tests you take, the more general your target score will be. So what do I mean by this? So if you take 1 to 2 practice tests, then your target score is not going to be, you shouldn't really, you should kind of increase the range of your target score, where your expectation should be a little bit broader as into where you should get, because there's a larger margin of, there's a larger margin of error. So there's a much larger margin of error when you're taking much fewer tests. When you take more tests, up to something insane like 10 practice tests, which I definitely would not recommend. Do not take 10 practice tests. People think that taking more practice tests will actually here's something else. I'm going to introduce you to take a little tangent. So people always think that the more practice tests they take, the more acquainted they are with the test, and the better they'll do. That's not the case. But the SAT, the actual SAT itself, that is the case. The more practice tests you take, the better you'll get. But for the general bio SAT subject test, you will not do better the more practice tests you take. Of course, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take any practice tests at all. You should definitely take practice tests. But like I said, the improvement over time comes from your study, comes from your learning from your mistakes, going over your questions, deeply analyzing your mistakes and what kind of patterns that you're missing. If you're missing out on specific organ systems, study that and kill that. So when you're studying and when you're improving and you're striving for improvement, instead of trying to increase, for example, I like to compare to wallpaper, right? Not wallpaper, so paint. So when you're painting over a wall and you're letting it dry, that's one test. And then you're painting over it again and letting it dry. You shouldn't keep on painting over the test multiple times. You shouldn't do general study. After 1 or 2 practice tests, you should know what areas of improvement you need. You should know what holes there are in your wallpaper and what things that are not drying. And then you need to specifically patch those up. You can't generally study for the entire time. That's not going to help you, right? You need to study specific areas and paint over them. Right? For example, if you're missing on the endocrine system, specifically hyper specifically study on the endocrine system. Best case scenario, you're only missing about a few questions. The questions that you're missing, at least, are only on a few topics. Like, for example, you might be only missing questions on endocrine system. Or you might be only missing questions on the heart system, the circulatory system. Then you only need to study those, perfect, and those are fine. But however, if you're missing general topics, like very broad topics, for example, molecular biology, then you might want to, like I said before, paint over the whole thing and just go do an in-depth studying on everything. And in that case, you should be fine. So I said that you should take around 3 to 4 practice tests. But if you really are striving for a, of course, I think I do. Do I have another slide? No, I don't have another slide. But I should have added another slide for if you want to get an 800. So I want to talk about that after. So like I said before, don't study for the specifics. So this slide is over. So the next slide, which I should have added, that's my bad, is the perfectionist slide. So there's a general strategy and a perfectionist strategy. So a perfectionist strategy is, how much time do I have? Okay, about 10 minutes. Okay. So a perfectionist strategy is almost completely different from a general strategy, almost completely different. So perfectionist strategy, of course, you should still be patching up your works. So perfectionists, for the first 1 or 2 practice tests, they should be already getting 750 to 800 range. So like I said, remember what I said, unless you're getting 750 to 800 range, you should be improving 40 to 50 points. That's separately. So when you're already in the 750, 800 range, first of all, don't worry. You're totally fine. Your future is set. In terms of SAT, you don't need to worry about it very much, actually. And if you are already getting 750 to 800 on your first few practice tests, like your first or second practice test, God forbid you even getting 800 in your first practice test, you really don't need to be studying as much as you need to. That basically means that you're already gifted in biology and you have a very good understanding of the biological concepts. People who take AP Bio and then take the SAT2 usually are in this range. So they already have a pretty widespread knowledge of biology. And or that can mean one of 2 things. So that's the first thing. The second thing means that you're just already a gifted studier. You already studied a little bit and you already know everything. Or you're a gifted learner, right? You pick up things very quickly. You're quick on the uptake. In that case, you really don't need to worry as much, especially for all the other subject tests. Because for the other subject tests, they're going to be generally easier and easier to get a higher score on. So in this case, you don't really need to worry about anything. But if you are in the 750 range, like if you're getting 750 to 770 in that range, and you're still getting frustrated that you're not getting 800, maybe your friends are all getting 800s and you're not getting 800. If you're still frustrated that you're not getting the perfect score that you want, there are a few things that you can do. So one, if you really are a perfectionist, if you really want to get 800, I would not recommend only taking 3 to 4 practice tests. If you are not getting the score that you want, in this case 800, and you really want to be a perfectionist, you should be taking around 7 to 8 practice tests. 7 to 8 is a little much. Maybe I'd say 6 to 7. 6 to 7 practice tests is a good number. So 6 to 7 practice tests are in that range. So in this case, perfectionists do tend to worry a little bit more about everything. So if they see a drop, for example, they've been consistently getting 770s, and then they got 780s, and they're getting 790s, and then one day all of a sudden they get a 740 for some reason, and they don't know why. Do not panic. That was some of my friends, and that was some of the people I tutored. They all came to me, Eric, why am I getting such a low score all of a sudden? That might mean one of two things. That day, maybe you just weren't feeling it. Maybe you weren't up to concentration. Maybe you weren't up to par with yourself. Maybe you were hungry. Maybe you were dehydrated. Something might have been wrong that day. In that case, the fluke is totally fine. Or maybe you've been slacking off on studying, or maybe you've been using that brain space for something else. Or maybe you think, okay, I'm already in the range I want. Getting 800 should be totally fine, totally easy, right? Very attainable for me. And then you all of a sudden slack off, and then you take a practice test just on a whim, and you get a lower score than you expect. In that case, do not worry. A fluke is just that, a fluke. Some tests are naturally harder, and the curve is just naturally worse than others. There's nothing you can do about that, right? And some days you just feel worse than others. Some days you might just feel really bad, and you just might not be concentrated as much. In that case, there's nothing wrong with getting 40 points lower than you usually do. You just need to remember to keep on being determined. Do not let that make you not determined, right? You have to keep on shoving on and continuing to take more practice tests. The more practice tests you take, the smaller and smaller your margin of error is going to be. The smaller and smaller your margin of error is going to be, and the more focused you are going to be on what kind of tests you're taking. So if, for example, if the last 2 or 3 practice tests you've been taking are all 800s, you should be totally fine. There should be no worries about the day of the test. You should be totally fine, and you should be getting an 800. That's nothing out of the ordinary. But if you do, for example, fluke, just take another practice test. Just wait a couple of days, take another practice test. Of course, don't not study during those days between the 2 tests. You should always study between tests, and you should even be studying, before the actual test. The only time you should probably stop studying is, if you finish the test. Of course, there's no reason for studying after the test. But during those 6 or 8 tests, you should get about an average. So if after taking those 6 or 8 tests, you're not seeing any improvement, 10-point or 20-point improvements, then you should maybe look at your average and kind of lower your expectations a little. Lower your target range from 800 to lower than that. Always, by the way, if you are a perfectionist, if you are aiming for the perfectionist strategy, never expect an 800. You should, okay, like I said, you should go with the intent of a perfect score, but you should still have a range. Whether the range is something as small as 790 to 800 or 780 to 800, or even 770 to 800. You should never say specifically 800. And that goes back to the fact that there are some factors that day that you cannot control. Factors like the warmth of the room, how thirsty you are, how tired you are. Maybe you didn't have a good night's sleep. Maybe you're too nervous the day before. Maybe on the cart right there, something changed, Maybe you start getting a cut, maybe that cut, or you start itching around, right? There's some factors that you cannot control on the day of the test specifically. So you should never expect to get a perfect 800 on the day. You should always expect for a range. Okay, so that said, this class is done. So this is the end of the class, and I gave you a few practice materials. So there's one site that I specifically like to give out to my students from Dubai. But don't worry about that. All those tests are in English, and they're very realistic SD subject tests. And also you can take a test from Crack SAT, although I really want to recommend Crack SAT. It's not the best available resource. But there are also questions from Khan Academy, and the actual College Board page itself does have tests. Not test specifically, but I think they do have practice questions for ERM if you're still on the fence. Of course, if you ask me, I can give you a few more materials. I believe I do have a couple more tests, the tests that I took. But other than that, yeah, that's the end of the class today. So that's also the end of this semester's class. So if there are any questions, don't be afraid to ask them now. All right, thank you for attending this class. And I'm going to be sharing this recording for the people who didn't come. I don't know why a lot of people came missing. But of course, if you have any personal questions, if you're taking the class and you do a test and you still have some questions, you can always email me. I'm going to be your tutor. I'm not going to stop being your tutor right after this class ends. Of course, if you have tests that you want me to go over with you, you can also schedule specific one-on-one sessions this is almost a one-on-one session, but of course I'm recording this, so it doesn't really count. I don't record the one-on-one sessions. I don't share them online, stuff like that, right? So with these tests, if you do have specific questions, you can always ask me. And with that being said, all right, I'll see you if you do have any questions. All right, thank you.